In this video, I'm going to be covering the basics of mixing so that your GarageBand projects can sound their very best. Let's go. Hi, my name is Pete and welcome to Studio Live today, where my goal is to help you create, record and release your best music. And yes, we're covering the basics of mixing. We're talking volume, panning, EQ and effects so that you can get the best out of GarageBand on the iPhone or the iPad. So let's jump in now and take a look. So what is mixing? Well, it's simply taking a number of audio tracks and mixing them together to create one final stereo track, which is known as your final mix. So in this video, I'm going to show you some of the techniques that are commonly used to mix a song. Let's get started. The song you heard in the intro was this one here. It is 8 different tracks and it is an 8-bar loop, and it sounds like this. And what you'll immediately notice there is that all of the volume levels are set right here in the middle. So they are all at 0 dB. Now, we don't actually have any labels here in GarageBand to help us out, but that's where they start from. And these are where we can actually adjust the volume down or up to actually mix our track. Now, if we double tap on any of these, it's going to go back to 0. So if you do a mix and you're like, oh, that's about right, and you're like, actually, no, I don't like it at all, just double tap each one of these and they come back to that 0 level and you can start again. And you would have instantly seen that with some of the VU meters here, some were way too loud, some are way too quiet. And also you would have heard that some are too loud and some are too quiet as well. So the first job, and what I like to do first, is to do what's called a static mix, which means that we're going to mix just the volumes without touching panning, without touching EQ, and without using any effects. So let's jump in and do that now. Oh, and if your interface looks more like this, all you need to do is find this little gray tab, tap and hold and drag out, and that will bring out all of your volume, your mute, and your solo buttons. And while we're talking about mute and solo, let's show you those first. So you'll notice here that we have a mute button for each track. And if we mute the tracks, you can see they're grayed out, so they'll no longer play. So if we mute out all 5 of these tracks and we hit play, we're now only hearing these 3, our lead instruments here. If we unmute those, we bring, say, the bass back in, we can get a sound like that. And if we unmute all of them, we get all of our tracks back in. So that's handy if you want to not hear particular sounds. Also, if you want to just hear particular sounds, you can use the solo button. So the solo here, we can tap if we want just one track. So say we just want to hear these drums. Like that. We want to bring back in this beat as well. And then we want to bring in these cymbals as well. So you can solo or mute any number of tracks. And if you want to go back to having all tracks, you just have all of the lights off and then you'll have all of your tracks available. So that's the first little tip around volume, is if you want to remove or just hear particular tracks, you can do it that way. So let's start talking about volume mixing. Now, there are 101 different ways to approach this. Some people like to put all the faders down, called faders down mixing, and then mix them all up individually. Some people like to start with everything around about the unity here and then just move things up and down as they like. Some people like to do things in groups, so they'll mix their drums together first and then their bass and then their treble instruments. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. What I'm going to show you here is a way that I use, which is a track like this. I'm going to firstly just make sure we have the beat down here, so the drum beat, and make sure that that is mixed in a nice way with everything working together, then add in our bass, then add in our treble instrument. So let's do that now. So as you've seen, I've soloed those first 3 tracks, and if we hit play, and what's coming out to me straight away is, and it's not only that I can see here that it's peaking on this meter, but I can hear it as well. Make sure you're using your ears, not just your eyes when you're mixing, because how it sounds is always more important than how it looks on a screen. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring all of these down. Now, I mix at a lower volume overall, so I'll rarely have a track that stays up there, because if you think about it, once you've had 8 tracks together and they're all at that loud, almost peaking volume, your overall volume is going to get very loud very quickly. And GarageBand does something called auto-normalizing anyway, which means if your overall track volume is too low, it will bring it up to 0 dB, which is the maximum volume. So don't ever worry about mixing too quiet, but definitely try to avoid mixing it too loud, or you're going to start getting distortion and clipping in your signal. So let's now balance out these sounds. We'll bring this one down, we'll bring our cymbals. Actually, the cymbals are quite quiet. As you can see there, if we just solo just these cymbals, they just sound like this. So they may need to stay a bit louder, probably even a little bit louder than that. This one's obviously the loudest, so that's going to go down, and this one will sit just above that. So if we solo all three of these and hear what the mix sounds like. Maybe that down a little bit more. Maybe that up a little bit. Nice, and you can see there that with it, none of our meters are peaking, nothing's clipping, and we're getting a nice solid but not too loud there because we have to add in our bass and our treble instruments. So let's jump in and do that now. Now we could unsolo these ones and solo just our bass and mix the bass together as well, but I tend to layer things up because eventually you need everything to play nicely together. So it's up to you how you do it. If you wanted to balance out just these bass sounds, you can do that, but I would tend to solo all the rest of the drums as well and get my whole sort of bottom end section going on here. So they're definitely both sounding too loud. So we're going to, what I'll do is I'll actually take the pick bass off first. This retro bass, if we just solo just this one, it's sounding like this by itself. So it's a very sort of piercing, cutting through sound because it's that retro bass. So if we drop the sound of that one down, bring that back in with our drums, it'll sound like this. Down a little bit more. There you go. So it's still cutting through the drums, still cutting through the beat, but it's not overpowering and it's not going to start really standing out in the mix. Let's grab this one here, this picked bass now. This one's pretty loud, so this is going to have to come down quite a bit. So let's try this down about here. So we really want that to just, we want that to sort of sit down underneath there. So you can already see that we've made some changes here. We've got a better sound here, a more balanced sound simply by adjusting the volumes. And before you get into effects, before you get into panning, getting a good static mix is something that I highly recommend. So now let's add in our treble instruments here. So we've initially got this pad, this luscious sweeping pad, a great name, one of the Alchemy synths, and this sounds like this added. That wasn't bad. I've just turned it down just slightly, so it's just sitting there. It's a pad after all. We don't want it to be the standout instrument. We've then got some arpeggiated electric piano here, so let's add this one in. That might even be right about there. It's sounding good. It's sitting there behind the mix. It's not overpowering. Now, our lead. So this is our warp lead that we want to have as our main treble instrument. So we'll play this one. So because it's a fairly harsh sort of sound, it does need to come down a little bit in the mix. So we'll bring that one down and we'll play it again. Maybe up a little bit. Cool. So I think that that is a good static mix. So that is really the majority of what you're going to be doing with mixing is balancing sounds, especially when you're using virtual instruments, because you would have heard a lot of these instruments already have some effects. Some of them already have some reverb and some delay. Some already have been EQ'd because they're virtual instruments coming in. However, what I'm going to show you now is what many consider the fun part, which is where you can start adding some different coloring and flavoring through panning, through EQ, and through effects. So let's jump into that now. So the next topic we're going to cover here is panning. So we can actually pan between the left and the right channel for our final stereo mix. Now to get to our panning options, we tap on the mixer icon. It's here in the top left on an iPad. If you're on a smaller iPhone, it may be in the top right under a menu there. So once you're in here, you'll notice that we've got some basic volume controls here. So this volume here is controlling this one here. They're connected, so you can change your volume there or there, it's the same thing. But we've also got this one, our track pan, and if we pan our track this way, it'll go all the way to the left, and if we pan it this way, it's going to go all the way to the right. So let's show you how we can use this to add some flavor here to some of these tracks. Now, typically, things like your drums and your bass are going to sit up the middle. They don't have to. And in fact, in this one, because I've got two bass sounds, I'm actually going to put one on the left and one on the right just to add a little bit of color here. So what I'll do is I'll select this retro bass, and now you can move it all the way to the left if you want, or you can move it part way so it'll sort of sit just off to the side of the audio spectrum. I'll show you what happens if we move these far left and far right. If we solo these two, now you'll listen. What you'll hear is on your left, if you're on stereo speakers or headphones, headphones will be the retro bass, and on the right side will be this picked bass. So because they're playing different rhythms, it's creating a little bit more interest. Now, I probably wouldn't put them all the way out there, but let's just bring them in to about halfway like that, and halfway like that. And if we play these back now, it's just adding a little bit of interest. Now, some of your virtual tracks are going to be stereo, so you'll still hear them bouncing around onto the other channel a bit. So keep that in mind. If it's an audio recorder track, it'll go all the way over there. But if you've got stereo, delay, or reverb or anything like that on them, then just bear that in mind. It may go onto your other track. So that's cool. That one just needs to come over a little bit. If we bring these back into our mix now and take a listen, our mix is starting to get a bit more stereo width. We can enhance this even further with our treble instruments. So it's your instruments that are in the higher register that you'll generally move around. So if you're recording guitars or you're using backing vocals, things like that, you'll tend to want to broaden those out, put them on the left and the right. So let's try this now. We're going to keep the pad down the middle, but what I'm going to do is put this electric piano all the way over here to the left, and I'm going to put this warp lead all the way over to the right. So just those two soloed sound like this. And again, because there's some stereo effects on here, they are coming a little bit across, but it actually kind of sounds cool. It creates this sort of warping kind of effect. So if we bring those back into our mix now and play, you can hear that it's much wider, and we can do this with any of our tracks. We can use panning, and it's a very effective and easy way to actually get a little bit more interest and some stereo width in your song. Now, be careful with this sort of thing, because sometimes people will listen on a mono speaker. You'll get your mix perfect in stereo, but it's a good idea that once you've finished a mix and you're listening to it, maybe listen to it through an iPhone speaker or something that's going to be a mono output, so that it sounds good if it's being played back in mono as well as in stereo. But there you go. That is the basics of using panning to enhance your mix. The next topic I want to cover is EQ, or equalization. Now, this is probably one of the least understood topics when it comes to mixing, but it's actually very simple. All EQ is a volume control for different frequencies. So far we've done the overall volume, we've done panning, which is actually just how much volume is on the left and the right. So we're still in the volume realm, and when we come in here and look at our EQ, we'll come in here to our visual EQ, we're still looking at volume controls, but all we're controlling now is the volume of each frequency. So if we want to turn the bass up, we put the bass up here. Want the treble to go down because it's too harsh, we turn it down there. Mid-range too nasally in some vocals, we turn it down there. And that's as simple as it is. It really is just taking different volumes, different frequencies, and moving them around. So let's give you a quick demo of how to use the visual EQ here in GarageBand to shape some of your sounds. So this is going to be pretty subjective, but me personally, this warp lead was just sounding a little bit too harsh and shrill to me. So let's listen. So it's a cool sound, but I think it's just standing out and sticking out a little bit too much. So what can I do? Well, I can use some EQ. So we're going to tap here. We've got the track selected. We're going to turn on the visual EQ and then tap here to go in and take a look. So what I can do is actually reduce the treble volume down here and actually cut that down. So I'm going to do it quite drastically and then sweep it back just so that you can hear the effect that this is going to have. We hit play. So can you hear there that it's reduced a lot of that harshness? So I probably wouldn't cut it quite that much. I'd probably just sort of bring it down like that, just so that when we play back, it's not completely removing all of that. It's just removing some of those harsh sort of resonant frequencies on the top. So if we hit done on that one, bring it back into our mix and hit play. And what you may find here is that your static mix may no longer be exactly where you want it, because if you're turning down a frequency, you may then want to turn up the overall volume. So if in this case, I just want to drive this volume up a tiny bit and... Cool, that's pretty much what we want. Now you can use EQ for mid-range and bass as well. Let's just show you a quick bass example. So this picked bass here, if we solo this one, If we wanted to even further enhance and thicken up this bass, we can do it. We just need to, again, turn on our visual EQ on this track, tap on that one, grab the bass here, and bring it on up. So let's just show you this again. We'll play it, and I'll bring the bass up and take a listen to what it does. So it can really enhance those bass frequencies by bringing it up there. And again, we can do the same in the mid-range here. You can play around with these. Experimentation is the key. And by the way, if you double tap any of these, it will go back to its normal level. So let's just bring this up. Let's give it a little bit of a boost here up to about 10 dB at 200 Hertz, and just giving it a little bit more punch through. We hit done on that one. Again, we bring it back into our mix and we hit play. Not bad. And again, we may just want to, again, bring the volume down just a little bit. So you can turn up the bass, but then bring the volume of the whole track down a bit just to sit in there. You'll also notice on our VU meters, because we did the panning, that you can see the left and the right on there. So just watch the bass here when we play it, and you'll see that it's over further on one side. If you look at these two instruments, you'll see that they're completely on the left and completely on the right. Cool. So that is it. That is the volume related stuff that we can do with a track. We can add volume, we can use EQ, we can use panning to get all of our volumes balanced. What about some of the cool effects that we can add? How do we add them to our final mix? Let's show you that right now. So when we're talking effects, the two most common ones are reverb and delay or echo. There's a whole bunch of other effects as well, and I've covered these in other videos, which I will link down in the description and at the end of this one as well. So if you want to learn about all of the different range of effects that you can use in your final mix, check out those videos. But for now, let's show you the basics of using effects. So the first way is to use our master effects. So as you select each track, you'll see that down the bottom here, there is master echo and master reverb. Now, some of our tracks already have that on there. So these treble tracks here already have, that one doesn't, but these two already have some echo and some reverb on them. What you'll notice also is if you go into the plugins and EQ here, you've got different settings here for each different track. So some of these already will have some. So for instance, this one already has overdrive and a compressor set to here. This one has a visual EQ and an effect EQ added. It depends on the different track as to what they already have added. So some of your loops, some of your virtual instruments, and some of your things like beat sequencer tracks will already have effects added there. So let's jump in and show you firstly how to use the master effects here in GarageBand. So with a track selected, we're going to tap on the master effects button here with the arrow. We can then drop down these arrows and it will show us which effect is selected. So you can select the default echo, the default reverb, or any of the others that you want to choose. So experiment with those, work out what's going to work best for your track. And I'll leave them on the defaults for now and go back to here. Now what we can do, let's say we wanted to add some effects. We'll just solo this modern disco track. It sounds like this. So we might not add this because drums, sometimes you want reverb and echo, sometimes you don't. But let's just show you what this does. Let's turn the echo up all the way and listen to what this does on the track. So it's sounding terrible, right? Because it's creating too much echo. But if we just added a little bit of this, it's going to give it a little bit more of that drive and that feel. So let's play. So it's just hearing a little bit of that echo. So we'll leave that on there. What about reverb? Well, reverb is that sound that you get like in a church hall or in a big stadium where it's not quite echo, but it's more of that reverberance, hence the name reverb. So let's turn the reverb up a long way and take a listen to this. Quite awful, yeah? So all these effects used too hard are going to sound pretty bad, but just a little bit of reverb like that. You can hear that we're just getting a little bit more color and flavor to our sound. So if we bring this back into our mix now, and and you can adjust those to taste. Now, one tip that I love to use in GarageBand is to put a little bit of reverb on pretty much every track. You might not use it on your bass, that may be the only one you don't use it, but I tend to just put a little reverb across every different track. And what this does, it kind of acts like glue. It glues it together because remember, you're selecting 8 individual instruments that are completely separate, but what you want your final track to sound like is all of these instruments playing together, kind of in the same room. So if you're using the same room sound, the same reverb sound across all of them, that can actually help. So here we've added a little bit to all of our tracks except the bass, and now it just fills up that space a little bit better and gives you a little bit more glue. It just really does bring it all together. It's no other real word for it. So that is using your master effects. Let's dive in now because there's some even better control you can have using the plugins and effects here in GarageBand. So to demonstrate these, I'm going to use this luscious sweeping pad again if we play it. Sounding pretty good, so I might not want to do anything to this, but if I want to add something different to it, I can come in here to my plugins and EQ, and I've already got a compressor and a visual EQ here. Now, our compressor is pretty important, but it needs a whole lot more explanation. So there's another video linked down in the description if you want to learn how to use it. Basically, it helps you balance out your sound. So adding compression is like another volume trick that is going to help you actually balance the sound of your instruments, and especially good on things like vocals and guitar. So if you're finding that you've got some variation, you can actually add the compression and that will compress it. Let's just show you this really quickly. We'll hit play on this track, turn up the compressor. So it just makes it a more consistent volume. And what you may then find if you add compression is you might need to turn down your volume because it'll be more consistent, but it'll be a louder volume. So we can use compression there. We can also use the EQ, which we've showed you previously, but we can add in a whole bunch of other effects here simply by hitting the edit button. So we tap on edit and look at this. We've got all of these different slots. We can tap on the plus button here and we've got all of these default effects here in GarageBand. Bit crusher, chorus, distortion, flanger, all goes on and on and on. So let's add in something. Why don't we go with a flanger? This will be a very obvious and interesting effect. So we'll tap on the flanger there and we get all of these controls. And once again, there's an entire playlist that tells you how to use all of these different plugins down below and at the end of this one. So if you want to learn more, you can do that as well. But let's just play this one back with its current default settings and see the sound that we get now. Cool, right? You can hear that flanging effect going in and out. So we can add in distortion, any other sort of effects that we want here simply by hitting the edit button and layering them up, adding them in. To remove them again, we just tap on the remove button there and delete it and it's gone again. But I actually kind of like that one. I'm going to leave it on there. Leave the flanger on there. You can also add third-party plugin effects. So it's even cooler than this. If we tap the edit button, we can tap a plus down here, say, and over here under audio unit extensions, if you've downloaded any AUV3 or plugin apps on your iPhone or iPad, you can add them in here. So you can see I've got quite a collection of different free and paid apps, as well as all of these free Apple AU plugins. So even if you don't want to buy any, there's 15 free Apple ones you can enable. And once again, there's a video link down below if you want to check that out. Let's just add in a free. So the LRC5 is one of my favorite free plugins. It is a free EQ plugin. It's like the visual EQ, but does a whole lot more. So it's really good for your mixing. If we tap on the icon here next to LRC5, you can see here it looks very similar. We can adjust our different levels. So let's say with this one, we actually wanted to give it a little bit of a boost up here on the treble. We can do that. And we wanted to sort of cut out some of the mid-range. You can see here you've got so much more control because you've got all of these different bands that you can actually tap in. So we hit done on that one. And now just sculpted that sound a little bit more. So you can use as many plugins as you have slots for them. Different sounds will have different number of slots and different numbers that you can add in, but most of them will have at least 2 to 4 plugin slots that you can add in some plugins and effects that are going to help you get that just that little bit of difference. Now, don't go nuts, or you don't need to go nuts. You can try, experiment, trial and error, find what works for you, but that is a great way to actually enhance your final mix and take it to that next level and make it close to radio ready. So we've adjusted our volume, our EQ, our panning, and added some effects for a little bit of color and flavor. So our final mix is ready to go. Let's hit play and see how it sounds. Very cool. So you'll notice there that nothing is clipping, nothing is overloading. You're not getting any red dots popping up here telling you that you need to turn some things down. So I think this is pretty well balanced and pretty much good to go. Now, clearly this has been an instrumental track that we've mixed here today just to show the fundamentals. If you're mixing in guitars and vocals and other live instruments, the exact same principles apply. And if you want to learn more about mixing vocals and including those in your tracks, check out the description below. There are some links down there to vocal mixing. The next phase for this is to master your track. And if you want to learn all about mastering, check out the other videos on the channel here about how to master your song in GarageBand or using other apps as well. I hope you found this introduction to mixing useful. There are 2 more videos linked right down below you can check out. You can subscribe to the channel by clicking or tapping on the Studio Live Today icon, and I'll see you next time.